My mother took money from the man who assaulted me to help him get to my daughter. My mom wants me to forgive the man who assaulted me. Not just forgive him, but let him go near me and my child unsupervised, as if he were just some old family friend. It's a level of delusion that still makes my head spin, even after all these years. The assault itself was a nightmare, a defining trauma of my youth, but the real, lingering horror? The part that poisons everything? It's what my mother did next. I was 16 when it happened. The perpetrator was Jack, my boyfriend's best friend. You'd think that would be the worst part of the equation, but it wasn't. You see, my mother never liked my boyfriend, who is now my husband. She thought he was aimless, from a family with no real standing in our small town. But Jack. Oh, she adored Jack. He was from a great family, which in her vocabulary meant they had money and a reputation to uphold. His mom was also her boss, a detail that hung over our lives like a guillotine. So when I finally, shakily, told her that Jack had forced himself on me, her reaction wasn't shock or horror or maternal rage. It was denial. Cold, hard, immediate denial. She told me I was mistaken, that I was being dramatic, that I was trying to ruin a good boy's life. The fact that Jack's mother signed her paychecks played a huge role in her disbelief. I knew it. But I couldn't just let it go. I couldn't stay silent while everyone pretended Jack was some golden boy. So I went to the authorities. My mother begged me not to, pleaded with me, told me I was tearing families apart. Her family, my family, the delicate social ecosystem of our town. Her job. When it became clear I was going through with it, our home became a war zone. The hostility was thick enough to choke on, so I moved in with my boyfriend and his parents. They took me in without a second thought, wrapping me in a warmth and safety my own mother had refused to provide. And that's when everything got infinitely more complicated. While I was staying at my boyfriend's, waiting for the trial, I found out I was pregnant. My world tilted on its axis. I knew, with a certainty that was both terrifying and absolute, that it wasn't my boyfriend's. We had never been intimate. I'd never been with anyone like that before Jack. The baby was his. A permanent, living consequence of what he had done to me. 5 months later, the trial concluded. It never went to a full verdict. Jack, faced with the evidence, finally admitted to the charges. He took a plea deal, and in the twisted logic of the justice system, that meant he got no jail time. Not a single day. The only real condition, the only thing that felt like a victory, was a court order stating he could never have the right to see my daughter. 9 months after that day in court, Emma was born. The moment I held her, a fierce, primal wave of love and protectiveness washed over me. This tiny, perfect person was mine to protect. The day Emma was born, my mother showed up at the hospital. She was crying, apologizing, saying she was sorry for everything she did, for not believing me. She asked me to move back home. A part of me screamed that it was a trap, that this sudden change of heart was too convenient. It was fishy, deeply so. But another, more naive part of me, the part that still wanted a mom, decided to forgive her. I told myself she'd seen the light. That was a mistake. A colossal one. The first year back home was peaceful. Deceptively so. My mom seemed genuinely remorseful. She apologized profusely and often. She was the perfect grandmother, doting on Emma, cooking us dinner, helping with night feedings. She was playing the part of the supportive mother I had always craved. It felt like we were healing, like our fractured family was slowly knitting itself back together. But it was all a performance. 1 year later, the facade crumbled. I had started college a few hours away. My mom, who had recently retired early, offered to watch Emma while I was at school. It seemed perfect. I stayed on campus during the week and came home every weekend. One Thursday, a massive snowstorm blew through the state. It was a complete whiteout. The university canceled all Thursday and Friday classes. I was thrilled. I decided to drive home early, without telling my mom, to surprise her and get some extra time with Emma. I walked into the house, shaking the snow off my boots, a smile on my face. And then I saw them. In our kitchen, sitting around the table like old friends, were my mom, Jack's mom, and Jack himself. And in Jack's arms, on his lap, was my daughter, Emma. He was holding her. My blood ran cold. The air in my lungs turned to ice. They all looked up, their faces a mixture of shock and panic. I didn't scream, not at first. I was paralyzed. Then, a tidal wave of rage crashed over me. "Get your hands off of her," I snarled. I snatched Emma from his arms, holding her so tight she squirmed. I started flipping out, screaming at all of them, my voice cracking with a year of repressed betrayal. I ran to my room, grabbed a bag, and started throwing Emma's things into it. My mother and Jack's mother followed me, pleading, their words a meaningless buzz in my ears. "Don't leave. Let's talk about this. You're overreacting." When I was ready to leave, my mother stood in the doorway, blocking my path. She was sobbing now, full on begging me to forgive her. To forgive her. As if she were the victim. "I will never forgive you," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "This is it. We're done." I tried to walk out, but Jack grabbed my arm. "You should be nicer to your mother," he said, his voice low and menacing. I ripped my arm away from him and walked out the door, without looking back. I drove to my husband's parents' place, my hands shaking so hard I could barely grip the steering wheel. That night, my mother called me hundreds of times. I never answered. My husband and I found an apartment and moved in together with Emma. I hired a babysitter for when I was in class. A week after the incident, over $100,000 appeared in my bank account. A deposit from my mother. It was blood money, a pathetic attempt to buy my silence or my forgiveness. I had no idea where she got it, but I had a sick feeling it came from Jack's family. I transferred it to a separate account and never touched it. It felt tainted. Years passed. 10 to be exact. I didn't speak to my mother once in that entire decade. I finished college, married my boyfriend, and we had another child, a son named Tyler. I was pregnant with our third. We had built a life, a safe, happy life, far away from her and her toxic allegiances. But then my younger sister got married, and I knew I couldn't avoid her forever. At the wedding, she cornered me. She was all smiles and feigned concern, asking about Emma, who she hadn't seen in a decade. She asked about Tyler and my current pregnancy. She told me how much she wanted to fix things, how she wanted to see her grandkids before she died. She even had the audacity to claim she had always believed me about the assault. "I just didn't want to get fired," she said, as if that was a reasonable excuse for betraying your own daughter. "Do you still see Jack's mother?" I asked, cutting through her performance. She hesitated. "Sometimes," she admitted. "Mostly at church." That was all I needed to hear. She was still friends with the woman who had enabled her son, the woman who had gone around town telling everyone I was a liar, that I'd slept with Jack willingly, and then cried assault out of guilt. The anger, which had been simmering for 10 years, boiled over. I ended the conversation and walked away. When I got home, I couldn't cool down. The injustice of it all was suffocating. After a long, sleepless night of pacing and thinking, I did something I thought I'd never do. I called my mom. For the first time in 10 years. I don't know what I was hoping for. Closure, maybe. A real apology. I wanted to see if there was any chance we could move forward, if she had changed at all. The conversation started well enough. We talked about superficial things, our current lives, my sister's wedding. It was stilted but civil. But then she mentioned church, and that was the opening she needed. The conversation inevitably turned to Jack. "You know," she said casually, "Emma looks so much like his other kids. It's really uncanny." The sheer callousness of that statement stole my breath. "I don't want to talk about him," I said, my voice tight. She ignored me. "He's a better person now," she insisted. "He feels just terrible about what he did. You know, it happened so long ago. You should really be over it by now." Over by now. The words echoed in my head, a perfect summary of her entire philosophy. My trauma had an expiration date. She had never, not once, asked for my version of what happened that night. She had only ever listened to his story, his excuses, his minimization of the horror he inflicted on me. "You want to know what happened?" I said, my voice shaking with fury. "You want to know what really happened?" And I told her. I told her everything. Every graphic, humiliating, terrifying detail that I had locked away for years. I told her how her defending him, her talking about him now, made me lose every last shred of respect I might have had for her. "Never call me again," I said, my voice breaking. "Keep our relationship exactly as it has been for the last 10 years. You will never change." I took a deep, shuddering breath. "And I will never, ever bring my children around you. I can't trust you with them." I hung up the phone, my hand trembling. I walked into the kitchen and poured a glass of water, trying to steady my breathing. My husband was at the dining table, his laptop open, but he was looking at me, his face etched with concern. He didn't have to ask. He could see the storm in my eyes. I sat down heavily, the glass shaking in my hand. My mother's words, "You should be over it by now," kept replaying in my mind. Her casual mention of Jack's other children, comparing them to my daughter, as if it were some normal, happy family connection. It made me feel sick. My husband closed his laptop and reached for my hand, but I pulled away. I couldn't be still. I stood up and started pacing the kitchen, the angry energy coursing through me needing an outlet. The sudden ring of the doorbell made me jump, my nerves already frayed beyond repair. We weren't expecting anyone. My husband went to the door while I stayed in the kitchen listening. I heard the door open, the rustle of paper. He came back holding a small, neatly wrapped package. It was addressed to Emma. "There's no return address," he said, turning the box over. A cold dread settled in my stomach. I took the package from him. It was wrapped in cheerful pink paper with a big bow, clearly meant to appeal to a little girl. My fingers tightened around it as a dark suspicion began to form. I grabbed a knife from the drawer and sliced through the tape. Inside was a delicate silver necklace with a heart-shaped pendant. Tucked alongside it was a note, written in neat, anonymous print. "For Emma, from someone who cares." My hands started shaking again, but this time it was with fear. I showed the note to my husband. I watched his jaw tighten, his expression hardening. Without a word, I walked to the garbage can and dropped the entire package inside. He nodded in agreement. We knew we couldn't tell Emma. She was at school, living her happy, innocent life, completely unaware that a monster from my past was trying to creep into hers. Over the next few days, more packages arrived. A silver bracelet, a beautifully bound book about family trees, a photo album with empty pages. Each one was addressed to Emma, each one had no return address, and each one went straight into the trash without her ever knowing. I started checking the mail obsessively, becoming a gatekeeper to my own home, intercepting anything suspicious before she could see it. Then one afternoon, Emma came home from school practically bouncing. She dropped her backpack by the door and skipped into the kitchen. "Mom, I made a new friend online," she announced, pulling out her phone. My hand, which had been chopping vegetables for dinner, froze midair. "Oh," I said, trying to keep my voice light and casual while alarm bells screamed in my head. "Tell me about them." "His name is Sebastian," she said, scrolling through her messages. "He's super cool. And he knows so much about our family. He told me stuff about Grandma that even you probably don't know." The knife slipped from my grasp, clattering loudly on the cutting board. I turned to face her, my heart pounding against my ribs. "What kind of stuff?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice from trembling. Emma shrugged, her eyes still glued to her phone. "Just, stuff about when she was younger, where she used to work, things like that. He says he's doing genealogy research and our family came up as really interesting." I walked over and gently took the phone from her. "Honey, can I see these messages?" Emma looked up, confused by my sudden intensity, but she handed it over. As I scrolled through the conversation, my blood ran cold. The messages were expertly crafted. They were friendly, inquisitive, and seemingly harmless. But woven throughout were details, small, specific details, that only someone intimately connected to our family would know. Details about my mother's old job at the firm where Jack's mom was her boss. Details about the town we used to live in. Mentions of distant family members I had never even talked about with Emma. "Emma," I said, my voice firm as I handed the phone back to her. "I need you to block this person. Right now." Her face fell. "But Mom, why? He's just being friendly. Please, just do it," I insisted, my voice sharper than I intended. She looked hurt, but she did as I asked, her fingers tapping on the screen to block the account. I pulled her into a tight hug, trying to shield her from a danger she couldn't even comprehend. "I'm sorry, sweetheart," I whispered into her hair. "I just want you to be safe online. You can't trust people you don't know in real life." That evening, after Emma was in bed, I called my mother. My hands were shaking again. She answered on the second ring, her voice laced with surprise and a pathetic hint of hope. "I thought you said never to call you," she said. I ignored her. "Did you give someone Emma's information?" I demanded, skipping any pleasantries. There was a beat of silence on the other end. "What are you talking about?" she finally asked. "Someone has been sending anonymous packages to Emma," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "And now she's getting messages online from a stranger who knows way too much about our family, about your past. Did you tell someone where we live?" I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered, but her voice was thin, unconvincing. There was a lie in that hesitation. "Mom, I swear to God, if you had anything to do with this." "Did Emma like the gifts?" she blurted out and then immediately tried to backtrack. "I mean, if someone sent her gifts, did she see them?" My grip on the phone tightened until my knuckles were white. "You knew," I whispered, the betrayal a fresh, gaping wound. "You knew about the gifts and you didn't warn me." Her voice became a desperate, pathetic whine. "I just thought, maybe if she got to know him a little, through nice gestures." I hung up before she could finish the sentence. I couldn't listen to another word. My entire body was vibrating with a rage, so pure it felt like it would consume me. She had conspired with him. She had given him access to my daughter. I immediately went to our computer and, with my husband's help, started a complete lockdown of our digital lives. We changed every password, tightened every privacy setting, scrubbed any personal information I could find. We worked in a tense, furious silence, the unspoken understanding hanging between us. We were under attack. The next few weeks were a living nightmare of hypervigilance. I drove Emma to and from school every day, her walks with friends now a thing of the past. I attended every single school event, my eyes constantly scanning the crowds, searching the faces for any sign of him. And then I saw him. It was at Emma's spring concert. He was standing at the back of the auditorium, partially obscured by a pillar, but I knew it was him instantly. The same build, the same arrogant way he stood with his hands shoved in his pockets. My blood turned to ice. He was watching the stage, waiting for Emma's choir to perform. I whispered urgently to my husband. "He's here. Back pillar." My husband was up in an instant, moving swiftly and quietly toward the back of the auditorium. But by the time he reached the pillar, Jack was gone. He had vanished like a ghost. We stayed for Emma's performance, clapping and smiling, pretending everything was normal. but I couldn't focus on her beautiful voice. My gaze kept darting to the exits, to the shadows, my mind screaming that he could be anywhere. This became the new pattern. He would appear at the edges of Emma's life, a face in the crowd at her soccer game, a figure leaning against a car across the street from her school play, a man I'd spot for just a second in another aisle at the grocery store. He was always just far enough away, just visible enough for me to see him, but never close enough to technically violate any legal boundaries. It was a sick, twisted game of psychological torture, and I felt like I was losing my mind. Finally, I snapped. I couldn't live like this, constantly looking over my shoulder. One evening, I left Emma with my husband and drove to Jack's house. I had found his address through a public record search, my hands shaking as I typed his name. The house was infuriatingly normal. A modest, well-kept suburban home with children's toys scattered across the front lawn. The sight of those toys, evidence of his other, normal life, made my stomach churn with a violent mix of rage and disgust. I rang the doorbell and waited, my heart pounding. When Jack opened the door, there was no surprise on his face. He looked almost smug, as if he'd been expecting me. "Leave my family alone," I said, my voice trembling but firm. "Stop sending gifts. Stop showing up at Emma's school. Stop trying to contact her online." He leaned against the doorframe, a small, condescending smile playing on his lips. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said calmly. "I'm just a concerned father who wants to know his daughter." "She is not your daughter," I spat. "You gave up any right to her the day you admitted what you did to me." His smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "Legal rights can be challenged," he said, his voice dropping to a quiet, menacing tone. "Especially when the mother is clearly unstable. Cutting off family members, getting paranoid about innocent gifts. Are you threatening me?" I asked, my voice shaking with fury. "I'm just saying," he continued, his calm delivery more terrifying than any shout, "that courts tend to favor reformed individuals who've paid their debt to society. Especially when they can prove the other parent is actively alienating the child from their biological family." I turned and walked away before I did something I would regret, but his words followed me all the way home, echoing in my mind. He had just laid out his entire strategy. That night, my husband and I made a plan. I started documenting everything. Every sighting of Jack, every anonymous package, every suspicious online interaction. I took screenshots of the Sebastian messages. I photographed the gifts before throwing them away. I created a detailed timeline of his stalking, complete with dates, times, and locations. My husband suggested we go to the police, but I knew his word against mine wasn't enough. We needed undeniable proof. So, we installed security cameras all around our house. We put dash cams in our cars. I started carrying a small voice recorder in my purse. If Jack wanted to play legal games, I would be ready. The situation escalated when Emma came home from school in tears. A group of kids had been taunting her on the playground, saying horrible things about me. They were calling me a liar, saying I had ruined a good man's life. The poison was spreading. Jack wasn't just targeting me anymore, he was targeting my daughter's entire world. I knew exactly who was feeding those rumors to the other parents. Jack's mother, still whispering her lies at church, at the grocery store, anywhere people would listen. I immediately called for an emergency meeting with Emma's principal, Mrs. Catherine, and her teachers. I sat in that sterile conference room and laid out the entire situation as calmly as I could, explaining the history without delving into the most traumatic details. As I spoke, I saw their expressions shift from polite concern to genuine alarm. "We've actually had a man asking questions about Emma," her teacher said slowly. "He claimed to be a family friend, said he was planning a surprise for her birthday. We didn't give him any information, of course, but it was unsettling." I slid a photo of Jack across the table, along with a copy of the temporary restraining order I had just filed for. They promised to increase security around the school and to notify me immediately if he ever appeared on the grounds. But I knew that wasn't enough. I had to control the narrative. That weekend, I organized a community gathering at our local park. I had lived in this neighborhood for 5 years. I had built friendships, volunteered at school events, participated in the community. These people knew me. They trusted me. It was time to arm them with the truth before Jack's lies could take root. Standing in front of a crowd of my neighbors, my friends, and the parents of Emma's classmates, I took a deep breath and started to speak. I didn't share the graphic details of my assault, but I explained that a person from my past who had hurt me was now trying to force himself into my daughter's life through stalking and manipulation. I asked for their help, for their vigilance, for their support in keeping all of our children safe. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Parents came up to me, sharing their own stories of protecting their kids, offering to help with school pickups, promising to keep an eye out for strangers. Mrs. Jones, whose daughter was Emma's best friend, pulled me into a fierce hug. "We've got your back," she said, her voice firm. "Anyone tries to spread lies about you in this neighborhood, they'll have to go through all of us first." For the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of hope. But Jack wasn't done. 2 weeks later, a courier served me with legal papers. My mother and Jack had jointly filed a petition with Child Protective Services. They were claiming I was an unfit mother, that I was neglecting Emma's emotional needs by denying her access to her biological family. The accusation felt like a physical blow, knocking the wind out of me. My own mother, conspiring with my attacker to try and take my daughter from me. The betrayal was so profound, so absolute, it cut deeper than anything she had ever done before. My husband immediately called our lawyer, Seb, while I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the papers in disbelief, the words blurring through my tears. The next few months were a blur of legal preparations. We gathered evidence, gave depositions, and tried desperately to maintain some semblance of normalcy for Emma and Tyler. We didn't tell Emma the specifics of the legal battle, but she was smart. She knew something was wrong. She became quieter, more anxious, clinging to me in a way she hadn't since she was a toddler. The court date arrived on a gray, miserable Tuesday morning. I dressed in a conservative suit, trying to project an image of stability and responsibility that I certainly didn't feel. My husband held my hand, a solid, unwavering presence, as we walked into the courthouse, our lawyer trailing behind us with boxes of evidence. The courtroom was small and suffocating. Jack sat at the plaintiff's table, looking confident and righteous. Beside him sat my mother. She wouldn't look at me. She just stared straight ahead, her hands clutching her purse. Jack, on the other hand, stared directly at me, an intense, possessive look in his eyes that made my skin crawl. The judge entered, and the proceedings began. Jack's lawyer painted a picture of me as an unstable, vindictive mother, consumed by a teenage grudge, who was systematically cutting off family ties and denying Emma her heritage. They twisted my community meeting into proof of my paranoid behavior. They played recordings of my mother crying on the phone to a friend, complaining about being denied access to her grandchildren. They even had character witnesses from Jack's church, people who testified about his remarkable transformation and his dedication to his new family. When it was our turn, Seb methodically dismantled their case. He presented our timeline of the stalking incidents. He showed the photographs of the anonymous packages. He submitted the screenshots of the online messages to Emma. He played the security camera footage of Jack lurking near our home and Emma's school. Each piece of evidence built a damning portrait of Jack's obsessive and menacing behavior. Through it all, the judge's expression remained neutral, unreadable. Then came the testimonies. My mother took the stand first, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue as she described how I had torn our family apart. She claimed she had only allowed Jack to see Emma that one time because she believed in forgiveness and second chances. During the cross-examination, Seb pressed her about the anonymous gifts. She denied knowing anything at first, but when he presented phone records showing a flurry of calls between her number and Jack's number immediately before each package was delivered, she faltered. For the first time, the judge's eyebrow raised just slightly. It was the first crack in her poker face. Jack testified next, a perfect portrait of a reformed man. He spoke of the mistakes of his youth, his deep remorse, and how he had since dedicated his life to being a good father and community member. He talked about his other children, his stable marriage, his volunteer work. He claimed he only wanted to know that Emma existed and was well cared for. When Seb questioned him about appearing at Emma's school events, he had a smooth, plausible excuse for everything. He was just passing by. He had legitimate business in the area. He had never approached Emma directly, so what was the harm? His calm, rational demeanor was chilling. Then something unexpected happened. The judge called for a brief recess. When we returned, she announced that Emma had requested to speak with her privately in her chambers. My heart stopped. We hadn't prepared her for this. She didn't even know the full, ugly truth of what was happening. The wait was excruciating. 20 minutes felt like an eternity. When the judge finally returned to the courtroom, her entire demeanor had changed. She called the court back to order and announced that, based on the evidence presented and her conversation with Emma, she was not only denying the CPS petition but was issuing a permanent restraining order against Jack. A wave of relief, so powerful it almost made my knees buckle, washed over me. It was over. We had won. Jack's face turned dark with fury. As we were leaving the courthouse, he brushed past me, his shoulder deliberately knocking into mine. "This isn't over," he whispered, his voice a venomous hiss. My mother scurried after him, not once looking in my direction. Their sick alliance was now fully, irrevocably exposed. The next few weeks were deceptively quiet. Emma seemed lighter, happier. We told her that some people had been bothering our family and that a judge had made them stop. It was a simplified truth, but it was enough for now. We tried to slip back into our normal lives, but I couldn't shake the feeling of dread, the echo of his whispered threat. And I was right to be worried. The accidents started soon after. First, my husband's brake lines were mysteriously damaged. Our mechanic caught it during a routine oil change, telling us we were lucky it hadn't failed on the highway. Then, Emma's school received an anonymous tip about drugs in her locker, leading to a humiliating public search that, of course, found nothing. Our credit cards were repeatedly compromised. Someone called Child Protective Services again, this time with a false report of neglect, claiming our children were often left home alone. Each incident on its own could be explained away as a coincidence or bad luck. But the pattern was undeniable. Jack was waging a war of attrition, trying to destabilize our lives, to make us look like chaotic, unfit parents, all without technically violating the restraining order. We reported everything to the police, but without concrete proof linking him to any of it, their hands were tied. The breaking point came when Mrs. Jones, my neighbor and friend, called me, sobbing hysterically. Someone had sent a package to her husband's workplace containing digitally altered, compromising photos of her. An anonymous message claimed she was having an affair with multiple men in the neighborhood. Her marriage was in crisis, her reputation in tatters. Soon, other families who had supported us began experiencing similar attacks. Mysterious calls to their employers, false reports to city agencies, digitally manipulated images spreading online. Jack was systematically targeting our support system, trying to isolate us, to make us toxic to be around. Some families, understandably terrified, began to distance themselves. The guilt was eating me alive. These wonderful people were suffering because they had dared to help us. Then, Emma came home from school with news that sent a fresh wave of ice through my veins. "Mom, we have a new school counselor," she said. "Mr. McCaffrey. He's really nice and he seems super interested in our family. He keeps asking me how things are at home." I immediately called the school. The secretary confirmed it. They had hired a new counselor. His credentials checked out, his references were solid. There was no official reason to be suspicious. But the timing was too perfect, too convenient. The next morning, I went to the school, determined to meet this man. The man who greeted me in the counseling office was professional, polished, and seemingly genuine. But as he looked at me, there was something in his eyes, a flicker of something cold and calculating, that set off every alarm bell in my body. Over the next few days, Emma mentioned more conversations with Mr. McCaffrey. He was asking her about her feelings about family, whether she ever felt like she was missing something, if she ever wondered about extended family members she didn't know. The questions were subtle, expertly worded to sound therapeutic, but I knew what they were. They were poison. They were grooming. We requested that Emma be assigned to a different counselor, but the school administration pushed back. Mr. McCaffrey was highly qualified, they said. Emma seemed to be responding well to him. Without any concrete evidence of wrongdoing, they wouldn't make a change. Meanwhile, the harassment campaign against our family and friends continued. My husband's employer received a string of anonymous complaints about his work performance. Tyler's daycare was repeatedly called with false concerns about bruises. Then I got a call that changed everything. It was from a woman named Sarah. She said she was Jack's ex-wife, and she needed to speak with me urgently. We met at a coffee shop downtown. Sarah's story was chillingly familiar. She had left Jack years ago after discovering he had been grooming their teenage babysitter. She'd fought for and won full custody, and in revenge, Jack had systematically destroyed her life. Lost jobs, ruined relationships, constant legal battles. She had eventually moved across the country to escape him. When I heard through the grapevine that he was doing this to another family, I had to find you. I had to warn you, she said, sliding a thick folder across the table. This is everything I documented. Every incident, every threat, every person he used. He won't stop. He'll either get what he wants, or he'll destroy you trying. The folder was a roadmap of Jack's psychopathy. Sarah had detailed his tactics, how he recruited others to do his dirty work, how he stayed just within the lines of the law while orchestrating chaos. Most importantly, she had names and dates. Armed with Sarah's file, we went back to the police. This time, they listened. The pattern of behavior, spanning multiple victims in different states, was undeniable. They opened a formal investigation. But Jack must have sensed the walls closing in because the attacks intensified. Our home security system was remotely disabled one night. Emma received a birthday card at school with no signature, just a photo of a family reunion she'd never attended. And then came the night that nearly broke me. I woke up at 3 a.m. with a strange feeling. A draft. I got up and checked the kids' rooms. Emma's bedroom window was wide open, the curtains billowing in the night breeze. She was still asleep in her bed, completely unharmed, but my heart stopped in my chest. Someone had been in our house. In her room, on her desk sat a single photograph. It was of Jack holding a newborn baby. On the back, in his handwriting, were the words, "She looks just like you did." The police found no fingerprints, no DNA. The security cameras had been disabled again. Jack had sent his message loud and clear. The restraining order meant nothing. He could get to Emma whenever he wanted. That night, we moved Emma into our bedroom. I didn't sleep for days. We were prisoners in our own home. The school situation came to a head when Mr. McCaffrey suggested Emma join a special family dynamics group therapy session. When I refused, he filed a report with the school expressing deep concern about my resistance to Emma's emotional development. Suddenly, I was being painted as the problem parent. Other parents started getting calls from him, subtly suggesting that Emma's home situation was unstable, that she showed signs of emotional neglect. Then, the private investigator we'd hired found the smoking gun. Mr. McCaffrey wasn't Mr. McCaffrey. His real name was Marcus Thorne. His credentials were forged. His references were fake. He was Jack's cousin. This was the piece that broke the case wide open. The police now had concrete evidence of a criminal conspiracy. They issued warrants for the arrest of both Jack and Marcus. But they were gone. They had vanished. Jack's house was empty. My mother's phone was disconnected. They had all gone underground. 2 weeks into their disappearance, a letter arrived with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a time, date, and a location, a park where Emma used to play when she was little. At the bottom, in Jack's handwriting, it said, "Come alone if you want this to end." I knew it was a trap, but I was so tired. Tired of running, tired of being afraid. I showed the letter to my husband and to Sarah. They begged me not to go, but I had to. This had to end. We made a compromise. I would go, but my husband and a plainclothes police officer would be nearby, out of sight. The next morning, I drove to the park. It was empty, except for a lone figure sitting on a bench near the playground. As I got closer, I saw that it wasn't Jack. It was my mother. She looked older, smaller, frilier than I had ever seen her. "He's not coming," she said, her voice a reedy whisper. "He sent me to deliver a message." She held out an envelope with a trembling hand. "He's leaving the country. He says he's done fighting. But he has conditions." "What conditions?" I asked, refusing to take the envelope. "He wants a photo of Emma. Every year on her birthday. Sent to a P.O. box. Just so he knows she's okay," she said, her voice cracking. "He says if you agree, he'll disappear forever. If not what?" I demanded. She finally looked at me, and in her eyes, I saw pure, unadulterated fear. "He says he'll dedicate the rest of his life to making yours miserable. That what you've experienced so far is nothing." I stared at her, this woman who had given birth to me, who was now acting as a messenger for my tormentor. "And you're helping him. Still," I said, the words flat and dead. "I don't have a choice," she whispered. "He knows things that would destroy what little life I have left." "You always had a choice," I said quietly. "You just never, ever chose me." I turned and walked away, leaving her crying on the bench. I didn't take the envelope. I wouldn't negotiate with a terrorist. The police picked her up minutes later. The fake counselor, Marcus, was arrested trying to cross the border into Canada. My mother was charged with aiding and abetting. And Jack was gone. That was 3 months ago. Marcus is awaiting trial. My mother received probation due to her age and her claims that Jack had coerced her. We are trying to rebuild. Emma is in therapy with a real, vetted counselor. The community has rallied around us, stronger than ever. Mrs. Jones's marriage survived, and she's become one of my closest friends. But I still check the locks twice. I still scan crowds for a familiar face. Sarah tells me the hypervigilance may never completely fade. It's the scar left behind. My husband and I are in counseling, too, working through the immense strain this put on us. He never wavered, but no one comes through a war like that unscathed. A few weeks ago, the FBI got involved. Jack, it turns out, has a trail of victims spanning multiple states. He's a serial predator, a manipulator of the highest order. They believe he did leave the country, probably to a place with no extradition treaty. I don't feel safe. Men like Jack don't just give up. But we are no longer just victims. We are survivors. Sarah and I, along with 10 other women Jack has targeted over the years, have formed a support network. We share information, we advocate for changes in stalking laws, we offer each other a unique understanding. It's a sisterhood forged in trauma, but it is powerful. Then, last week, we got the breakthrough we had been praying for. Jack's current wife, a woman living with him in Mexico, found our support group online. She recognized the patterns of control and paranoia. She wanted out, and she was terrified for her children. She agreed to cooperate with authorities in exchange for protection. The FBI, working with the Mexican Federal Police, put his apartment under surveillance. The call came at dawn. They had him. They arrested him in his sleep. He is in custody. Extradition will be a long process, but he is caught. When I told Emma, she just hugged me tightly. "Does this mean we can stop being scared now?" she asked. "Yes, baby," I said, crying for the first time in months, a torrent of relief and grief and hope. "We can start." 2 weeks later, my mother had a massive heart attack and passed away. I went to the funeral alone. I said goodbye to the woman who should have been my protector, and in the quiet of that empty church, I forgave her. Not for her, but for me. The trial is set for next summer. I will have to testify. I will have to face him again. But this time, I won't be a scared 16-year-old girl. I will be a woman who fought a monster and won. And I won't be alone. I will be surrounded by a dozen other women who will stand with me, a chorus of survivors whose voices will finally drown out his lies. We survived. We're healing. We're free.